The sound of laughter filled the afternoon air. Balloons danced lightly in the warm breeze, and the smell of barbecue drifted from the backyard of a modest suburban home. Children's laughter, upbeat music, and cheerful voices painted a picture of pure joy, the kind of moment that should make anyone smile. But just beyond the white picket fences and manicured lawns, a pair of eyes watched with unease. A phone was lifted, numbers were dialed, and a voice whispered into the receiver, "There's a large gathering at the Johnsons' house. It's getting out of hand." Within minutes, sirens would break the rhythm of that happiness, and what began as a family birthday celebration would soon turn into a moment the entire neighborhood would never forget. Hey everyone, welcome back to Swift Tale, where we share powerful, real-life inspired stories that open hearts, challenge assumptions, and remind us that empathy still matters. If you're visiting Swift Tale for the first time, take a second to like, share, and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear is one that will make you question what you'd do if you were in the same situation. Would you call the police on your neighbors for being too loud, or would you walk over and join the celebration? That's the question at the heart of today's story. Neighbor called 911 on black family's birthday party, then froze when the dad walked out in uniform. Our story begins with the Johnson family, a close-knit, loving household excited to celebrate their son Malik's 10th birthday. After a long week of work, school, and commitments, this Saturday was meant to be simple, filled with laughter, grilled food, music, and family. Their home sat in a quiet, suburban neighborhood they'd moved into just last year. It was a peaceful area, known for its trimmed hedges, cul-de-sacs, and quiet evenings. The Johnsons were friendly, respectful, and kind. They introduced themselves to neighbors, waved on morning walks, and attended neighborhood meetings. But sometimes, even smiles and good manners can't soften the invisible walls built by bias. As the party began that afternoon, everything felt perfect. Malik's friends were running around the yard with balloons, his grandparents were taking photos, and his mother Tanya was laughing as she set the cake on the table. Marcus Johnson, the father, calm, composed, and gentle, was flipping burgers at the grill, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. No one could have guessed that this peaceful day would turn into something so unforgettable. A few houses away, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Peterson sat by her window. To her, the noise sounded different. She noticed the music, the crowd of cars parked on the street, and something in her mind began to stir, not hatred, but suspicion. A suspicion that came from years of quietly absorbing stereotypes. Her heart started to race as she convinced herself she was just being cautious. With a sigh, she picked up the phone and dialed 911, reporting a disturbance. And that's when everything changed. The distant hum of police sirens began to mix with the laughter of children. Tanya noticed first, her smile fading slightly as she looked toward the street. A few guests exchanged nervous glances. For the Johnsons, and for so many other black families, the sound of sirens didn't always bring comfort. Sometimes it brought fear. Fear that no matter how kind, professional, or law-abiding they were, someone else's assumptions could turn their happiness into danger. But this story isn't one of tragedy, it's one of revelation. Because when the officers arrived, and when Marcus, the father, the man behind the grill, calmly stepped inside and returned wearing his full police uniform, the entire neighborhood froze. In that one moment, silence replaced suspicion. The truth stood right in front of them. The very man they'd called the police on was, in fact, one of them. An officer, a protector, a neighbor. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, let's pause and ask ourselves, why does this story matter? It matters because it reveals the quiet power of perception. It shows how quickly joy can be misread and how easily bias can turn ordinary moments into conflict. It matters because it reminds us that behind every stereotype, there's a human being, someone's father, someone's mother, someone's child. It's a story about more than one birthday party. It's a mirror held up to society, asking each of us to see what we might not want to. So today, as we journey through this emotional and eye-opening story, keep that question close. What would you have done? Would you have seen a family or made a judgment? Would you have joined the laughter or reached for the phone? Because sometimes the truth we uncover in others is really the truth we must confront within ourselves. This is Swift Tale, and this is where stories like these remind us that empathy isn't weakness, it's strength. Stay with me, because what happens next will not only surprise you, it'll change the way you see the world around you. The morning sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold as the Johnson family prepared for what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of the year, Malik's 10th birthday. Their home, a modest but beautiful two-story house at the end of Maplewood Drive, stood as a symbol of achievement and new beginnings. Just a year ago, Marcus and Tanya Johnson had finally been able to buy this home after years of saving and dreaming. It wasn't just a house. It was proof that hard work, perseverance, and faith could build something lasting. The white porch swing, the blooming flowers Tanya had planted by the walkway, and the laughter of their children that often spilled out into the neighborhood, all of it reflected a simple truth. The Johnsons were proud of the life they'd built together. Inside, the air buzzed with excitement. Malik was running around the kitchen, half-dressed, wearing a paper crown and grinning from ear to ear. His little sister Ava was trying to steal frosting from the cake, while Tanya playfully swatted her hand away. "Not until the guests get here," she laughed. The radio played upbeat tunes as Tanya prepared trays of food, barbecue ribs, homemade mac and cheese, and her famous peach cobbler. She was in her element, humming as she moved between the stove and the counter. Meanwhile, Marcus stood in the backyard, setting up folding tables and chairs under a wide blue canopy. He checked the grill, making sure everything was perfect. He was meticulous, not because he was nervous, but because he wanted this day to be perfect for his son. As he arranged the balloons and adjusted the tablecloths, he couldn't help but smile. He thought about how far they had come. As a police officer, Marcus had seen the best and worst of humanity. He'd witnessed heartbreak, courage, and moments that tested his faith in people. But here, at home, surrounded by love, he felt peace. Maplewood Drive was a quiet suburban street, the kind of place where lawns stayed trimmed, kids rode bikes in the evenings, and neighbors waved politely as they passed by. But beneath that calm exterior, there was something else, an invisible tension, subtle yet present. The Johnsons were one of only two black families in the neighborhood. While most neighbors had welcomed them kindly, others kept their distance. The stares were never overtly hostile, but they lingered long enough to be noticed. Marcus and Tanya chose to brush it off. They wanted to believe that time, kindness, and familiarity would change any doubts people had. As guests began to arrive, the atmosphere turned electric. Cars lined the curb, music grew louder, and laughter filled the air. Relatives from nearby towns showed up with gifts, hugs, and stories. Kids ran around playing tag, their sneakers kicking up tiny clouds of dust as they shouted and giggled. Someone brought out a portable speaker, and soon, old-school R&B mixed with the sound of sizzling burgers. The scent of grilled meat, sweet corn, and coleslaw wrapped the yard in warmth and comfort. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, curious. Some smiled and waved, others just watched quietly. Most didn't know the Johnsons personally, but seeing a large gathering of black faces in their otherwise uniform neighborhood stirred something in them. Not anger, necessarily, but a kind of unfamiliarity, the kind that often hides beneath the word concern. Inside the Johnson home, Tanya was putting the finishing touches on Malik's birthday cake, chocolate with bright blue frosting and 10 golden candles. She smiled as she heard Malik's laughter echo from the backyard. It was the kind of pure sound that made every sacrifice worth it, every late shift Marcus had taken, every moment she'd worked double hours at the hospital to make sure they had enough for the down payment on the house. Then, as the party reached its joyful peak, the first small sign of tension flickered. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson, a widow in her late 60s, stood behind her lace curtains, phone in hand. She lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years and had seen many families come and go. She wasn't used to this much noise, this much energy. To her, Maplewood Drive was supposed to be quiet, calm, predictable. As she watched car after car pull up and heard the music echo through her living room, she frowned. "They're nice people," she murmured to herself, "but this is getting out of hand." She didn't mean harm, not really at least, that's what she told herself. But in that moment, her perception was already shaped by years of subtle prejudice, the kind that whispers, "They don't belong here the same way we do." She made tea to calm her nerves, glancing out the window every few minutes. With each passing hour, her unease grew. She imagined the worst, strangers from outside the neighborhood, loud music leading to trouble. She convinced herself she was acting responsibly. Back at the party, the Johnsons were blissfully unaware of her growing concern. Marcus's old friends from the force had stopped by, joking and telling stories. Malik opened his gifts with the excitement only a child could have. Tanya danced with her mother, who clapped her hands and laughed like she hadn't in years. The sky glowed orange as the sun began to dip behind the trees, and it felt like nothing could ruin this perfect day. But that's how it always happens, peace interrupted by misunderstanding, a joyful noise mistaken for chaos, a gathering seen as a threat, the same scene viewed through two very different lenses. On one side of the street, unity, love, and laughter. On the other, suspicion and fear. As the evening light faded and the first stars appeared, Marcus looked around his backyard with pride. "We did good, huh?" he said softly to Tanya. She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah," she replied, "we really did." Neither of them knew that just a few houses away, a neighbor's fingers hovered over a phone, ready to press call. And with that single action, their night, their peace, was about to change forever. From her living room window, Mrs. Peterson sat in her favorite floral armchair, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. The steam had stopped rising, but her thoughts hadn't. Outside, the sounds of joy continued, children's laughter, the steady rhythm of music, the hum of conversation. To anyone else, it was the sound of life. But to her, it sounded like something else entirely: noise, disruption, disorder. She told herself she wasn't the kind of person to judge, that she didn't see color. But deep down, she knew there was something about the scene next door that made her uneasy. She tried to dismiss it, to focus on the TV in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to the party. The sound of bass thumping in the distance made her chest tighten. She had lived on Maplewood Drive for over 3 decades, and it had always been quiet, predictably quiet. And now this. She told herself it wasn't about race. It was about respect for the neighborhood. That's what she repeated in her mind like a prayer. It's not that they're black, she thought. It's just that they're different. She didn't mean it cruelly, at least not intentionally, but bias rarely announces itself loudly. It hides behind softer words, different, loud, unfamiliar. Her cat, Whiskers, brushed against her leg, purring softly. Absent-mindedly, she reached down to pet him, her eyes never leaving the window. She saw the string lights flickering in the Johnsons' backyard, heard bursts of laughter and clapping. For a moment, she hesitated. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe they were just celebrating. But then she noticed a group of young men laughing loudly by their cars, and her imagination started spinning its web. "It's getting late," she muttered. "People are drinking. Things could get out of hand." Her heart began to beat faster as she picked up the phone. She didn't want trouble, she just wanted peace. That's what she told herself, peace. The kind of peace that really meant control. She hovered over the keypad for several seconds, the faint sound of Malik's birthday song echoing through the night. "Happy birthday to you," the melody drifted softly across the lawns, carried by the evening breeze. It was an innocent sound, but to Mrs. Peterson it felt intrusive, too close, too alive. Her thumb pressed the number 9, then 1, then again 1. The call connected. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, routine. Mrs. Peterson hesitated for a moment, realizing that what she was about to say might sound trivial. She didn't want to seem unreasonable. "Hi, I'm calling about a situation on my street," she began, her tone trembling slightly. "There's a large group of people next door. It's really loud, and there are cars everywhere. I'm not sure what's going on, but it's making me uncomfortable." The dispatcher asked the usual questions: location, any signs of danger, any visible weapons. Mrs. Peterson frowned. No, nothing like that," she replied quickly. "They just look like they're having a big party, but it's getting out of hand. I think they might be disturbing the peace." The dispatcher typed the details into the system. To her, it was just another call, one of dozens that night. But to the Johnson family, it was a moment that would soon change everything. When Mrs. Peterson hung up, she exhaled shakily. Her stomach twisted, a mix of guilt and self-righteousness swirling inside her. She didn't want to get anyone in trouble. She just wanted quiet. But as she sat back in her chair, staring out the window, she couldn't ignore the tiny voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had done something wrong. She tried to rationalize it. "If it were any other family, I'd do the same," she murmured. But the truth was she wouldn't have. If it had been the Petersons from down the block or the Wilsons next door, she would have gone over herself, knocked on the door, and politely asked them to turn the music down. But something about the Johnsons felt different to her. The unfamiliar faces, the loud laughter, the confidence in their joy, it all unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite name. She walked to her window again and watched the flashing lights from the string decorations shimmer against the night sky. The faint sound of Malik's laughter echoed through the air, innocent and unbothered. For a moment her chest tightened. She remembered her own son years ago, laughing the same way during his birthdays before he moved away, before her house grew quiet and lonely. The memory softened her expression for a moment. But then, as she saw another group of guests arriving, the unease returned. "It's just not right," she said under her breath. "This isn't that kind of neighborhood." The truth was, Mrs. Peterson wasn't a bad person. She volunteered at the church, baked cookies for the annual fair, and sent Christmas cards to everyone on her street. But prejudice doesn't always look like hatred. Sometimes it looks like fear disguised as concern or ignorance pretending to be order. And that was exactly what this moment was, a small decision born from a lifetime of unexamined thoughts that would soon bring real consequences. Minutes passed. She paced near the window, checking her watch, her pulse quickening when she finally saw the red and blue lights reflecting faintly off the nearby houses. Her stomach dropped. The sirens grew louder. "Oh no," she whispered. "They actually sent someone." Her first instinct was to go outside and explain, to tell the officers it was probably nothing. But shame held her back. She didn't want to look foolish. She didn't want the Johnsons to know it was her. So she stayed where she was hidden behind her curtains, watching the scene unfold like a spectator in a story she had written but didn't want to own. Police cruisers stopped in front of the Johnsons' home. The laughter began to fade. People started to look toward the street. Mrs. Peterson's throat went dry. She hadn't expected this, not really. She thought maybe an officer would just drive by, check things out, and leave. But when she saw two officers step out, hands resting near their belts, her heart started to race. For the first time, she felt something close to fear, not of the party, but of what might happen because of her call. Through her window, she watched the officers approach the yard. Tanya, the mother, looked confused, then concerned. Guests turned quiet. The music stopped. Even the children sensed something was wrong. Mrs. Peterson's breath hitched as she realized the weight of what she had set in motion. "Oh no," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "What have I done?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy, lingering, and impossible to take back. Mrs. Peterson didn't know that the man she just summoned the police upon was one of their own. She didn't know that Marcus Johnson, the calm and kind man flipping burgers for his son's birthday, had spent years protecting families just like hers. She didn't know that the uniform hanging neatly in his bedroom closet would soon expose her deepest prejudice. All she knew in that moment was the feeling in her chest, a mix of shame and denial, regret and pride. She told herself she wasn't wrong, but as the red and blue lights flashed across her window and the sound of children crying drifted faintly through the night, a quiet truth began to form in her heart. She had acted out of fear, not reason. And fear, once unleashed, can change everything. The night had fallen softly over Maplewood Drive. The warm glow of porch lights and the muffled sounds of distant laughter blended with the chirping of crickets. For the Johnsons, the evening was still alive with joy, the grills sizzling, the chatter of family, the music fading in and out as kids darted through the yard. To anyone passing by, it was nothing more than a neighborhood celebration. But a few blocks away, inside the dispatch center of the local police department, a different kind of noise filled the air, the constant buzz of phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and the steady hum of radios. Among the flood of calls about traffic stops and minor disputes, one message blinked onto a dispatcher's screen: possible disturbance at 118 Maplewood Drive. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, almost mechanical, the product of years of training. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Yes, I'm calling about my neighbors," she said, her tone shaky but deliberate. "They're having a large party. It's really loud, and I don't know everyone there. Cars are parked all up and down the street. It just doesn't seem safe." The dispatcher tapped the keyboard, inputting her words, repeating them aloud as she typed. "Loud party, possible disturbance, multiple vehicles on site," she asked. "Ma'am, do you see any weapons or fighting?" No, nothing like that," Mrs. Peterson quickly replied, "but I think there might be drinking, and well, you know how things can escalate." There it was, you know how things can escalate. Those words, heavy with implication, slipped easily from her lips. They didn't sound hateful, but they carried the quiet bias that so often fuels misunderstanding. The dispatcher didn't know the Johnsons. She didn't know the neighborhood or the woman making the call. But the coded language, loud, unfamiliar, unsafe, painted a picture that didn't match reality. In the sterile glow of the dispatch room, that simple picture became a potential threat. "All right, ma'am," the dispatcher said. "We'll send someone to check it out. Officers will arrive shortly." When Mrs. Peterson hung up, her heart pounded. A wave of unease washed over her, half satisfaction, half regret. She told herself she'd done the right thing. "It's better to be safe than sorry," she murmured, even though deep down she wasn't sure what she was keeping herself safe from. Back at the party, the Johnsons were preparing to cut the cake. Malik stood proudly in front of the table, surrounded by his friends. "Make a wish, birthday boy," Tanya called out, her eyes shining. Marcus lit the candles, the golden flames dancing in the gentle wind. Everyone began to sing, a sound so joyful it filled the night sky. "Happy birthday to you." And then, faintly in the distance, came a sound that didn't belong. Sirens. At first they were barely noticeable, just a hum beneath the music. But within seconds, the flashing red and blue lights painted the street in harsh colors. The laughter faltered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the children fell quiet, their eyes wide. Marcus's hand froze above the cake knife. The sound of approaching engines shattered the moment. "Are those," Tanya began, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus didn't let her finish. He knew the sound too well. Two police cruisers rolled slowly down the street, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Curtains twitched in nearby houses. The one celebratory air turned heavy, uncertain. The officers stepped out, adjusting their belts, scanning the scene. One of them, Officer Riley, rested his hand lightly on his holster, a reflex more than a threat, but one that didn't go unnoticed. The music stopped completely. Marcus stepped forward, his expression calm but guarded. "Evening, officers," he said evenly. "Can I help you with something?" The lead officer, a tall man with a tight jaw, looked around before speaking. "We got a call about a possible disturbance. Some neighbors were concerned about the noise." Marcus glanced at his guests, who stood frozen in confusion. Tanya held Malik close, her hand gently on his shoulder. "It's my son's birthday," Marcus explained, his voice measured, controlled. "Just a family gathering." The officer nodded, but his eyes kept moving, scanning the crowd, the tables, the parked cars. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" he asked. His tone was polite but firm, carrying that familiar weight of authority that demanded compliance even when cloaked in courtesy. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd been on the other side of these situations countless times, the responding officer, the professional keeping things calm, but being on this side felt different. He raised his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "Sure," he said softly, "you're welcome to look." Tanya's mother whispered under her breath, "This is unbelievable." One of the children began to cry. The officers walked slowly through the yard, shining their flashlights over the tables and guests, as if searching for something that wasn't there. Every eye followed their movements. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the sirens. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson watched from her window, curtain pulled just slightly aside. The flashing lights reflected in her eyes. She could see the confusion, the unease spreading across the Johnsons' faces. She wanted to believe she'd done the right thing, that she'd acted responsibly. But seeing the police in their yard, the little boy clutching his mother's leg, the tension she had caused, something inside her began to twist painfully. "It shouldn't have gone this far," she whispered, but it had. And there was no taking it back. Inside the patrol car, the radio crackled with other calls. The officers knew deep down that this wasn't a dangerous situation. The atmosphere was calm. No one was aggressive, but procedure required that they stay alert. And sometimes, the power of procedure can drown out the whisper of common sense. Marcus watched them, his mind flashing back to moments from his own time on duty, times when he'd been called to similar disturbances in neighborhoods just like this one. He'd always handled them with care, with empathy. But now, standing here as the subject of that same suspicion, the irony cut deep. Finally, one of the officers returned to him. "Everything seems fine here, sir," he said quietly, his tone softer now. "We'll log it as a noise complaint and move on." Marcus nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Appreciated, officer. You all stay safe out there." As the cruisers began to back away, the tension hung in the air like smoke. The laughter didn't return right away. The children stayed close to their parents. Tanya's eyes glistened as she looked at her husband, not in anger, but in pain. "They called the cops on us, Marcus, for a birthday party." He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Yeah," he said, "they did." But as the police lights faded into the distance, Marcus's mind wasn't at peace. Something inside him stirred, not rage, but resolve. He knew he couldn't let this moment pass quietly, because sometimes silence lets ignorance grow unchecked, and he wasn't going to let that happen. Meanwhile, across the street, Mrs. Peterson stood motionless. The sirens were gone, but their echo lingered in her chest. The sight of those flashing lights and the fear they had caused would replay in her mind for days to come. She had wanted peace, but what she had brought was pain. And soon she would face a truth that would make her see herself and her assumptions in a way she never had before. Because what she didn't know yet was that the man she'd unknowingly reported, the one she'd mistaken for a threat, wore the same badge as the men who'd just arrived. And soon, when he stepped out in uniform, her world would stop cold. The sound of police sirens shattered the evening calm like glass underfoot. From the backyard, laughter halted midair as the flashing red and blue lights painted the white fence in harsh colors. For a few seconds, everyone froze, unsure of what was happening. Children turned to their parents, wide-eyed and confused, while adults exchanged wary glances. The cheerful playlist that had been thumping from the speaker suddenly felt too loud, out of place. Marcus, who had been refilling plates at the buffet table, looked up sharply, his instincts kicking in immediately. Years on the force had trained him to recognize the difference between a casual patrol and a dispatched response. The tone of the siren told him this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had called them. "Marcus," Tanya's voice trembled slightly as she stepped closer, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" He didn't answer at first. He was already scanning the scene, the flashing lights bouncing off the trees, the hum of the cruiser's engine growing louder as it pulled up in front of the house. "Stay calm," he said quietly. His voice steady, but his jaw tight. "Everyone, stay calm." The guests began whispering. Some took out their phones, others gathered their children closer. A few of the older relatives shook their heads. They'd seen this before, in different ways, in different places. Joy once again being mistaken for threat. Out on the street, the police cruiser came to a stop. Two officers stepped out, their body language rigid, professional, but slightly tense. One was young, maybe in his late 20s, his hand already resting near his holster. The other, older and more experienced, scanned the area with measured eyes. They could hear the faint echoes of music and laughter from the backyard, but now the sound carried an edge, not celebration, but confusion and apprehension. Mrs. Peterson stood a few houses away, arms folded, watching from her porch. She didn't expect things to escalate this much. She had only called to check, to make sure nothing was wrong. But now that the police were actually here, a flicker of doubt passed through her. Maybe she had overreacted. Still, she stayed where she was, justifying her actions silently, better safe than sorry. The younger officer, Officer Reed, approached the door with a stern expression. He knocked firmly. When Tanya answered, her eyes reflected both fear and confusion. "Good evening, ma'am," Reed began, glancing past her into the house. "We received a call about a possible disturbance, loud music, possible trespassers." Tanya blinked. "A disturbance? Officer, it's just my son's birthday party. We've been here all day with family and friends." Reed's partner, Officer Daniels, spoke next, his tone more measured. "Mind if we take a quick look around, just to make sure everything's okay?" Before Tanya could respond, Marcus stepped forward from behind her, wiping his hands on a towel, his face composed but serious. "Evening, officers," he said, his voice calm yet carrying authority. Both officers turned to look at him, the younger one instantly tensing up. Marcus's presence was commanding. He stood tall, his gaze direct but not confrontational. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" Reed asked, his tone clipped. "I am," Marcus replied evenly, "Marcus Johnson, and before we go any further," he reached into his back pocket and slowly pulled out his badge. "I'm also an officer, Metro Police Department, badge number 4162. The change was immediate. Reed's expression faltered, confusion flashing across his face. Daniel's posture softened as he stepped forward, squinting at the badge under the porch light. The tension that had been building in the air seemed to shift direction from suspicion to embarrassment. You're on the force," Reed stammered. "Yes," Marcus said, "for 15 years. Detective, Major Crimes Division." His voice was steady, professional. "Now, can someone explain why there's a cruiser in front of my home during my son's birthday party?" The backyard had gone completely silent. Guests hovered near the fence, listening. Tanya stood behind Marcus, her hand on his shoulder. Malik peeked from behind her leg, confused. Daniels cleared his throat, trying to recover. "We, received a noise complaint, sir. A neighbor reported, well, a possible situation involving loud music and unfamiliar guests." Marcus exhaled slowly, fighting to stay composed. "A noise complaint, right." He looked around, noting that no other houses had parties, no one else was being questioned. His voice lowered, edged with disappointment. "You know what this is, don't you?" Neither officer responded, but Daniel's silence said enough. Reed looked visibly uncomfortable now, shifting from one foot to the other. Marcus nodded toward the backyard. "You're welcome to take a look if you need to. You'll find children playing, family eating, and a 10-year-old boy who's about to cut his birthday cake." His words carried both pride and restraint, the kind of measured control only someone deeply used to injustice could manage. Daniels shook his head quickly. "That won't be necessary, Detective Johnson. I think we've seen enough. Sorry for the interruption, sir." Marcus didn't move. "No, Officer Daniels, you're not apologizing to me, you're apologizing to them." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the guests, the people who had just been made to feel unsafe at a family celebration. "My son, my wife, my neighbors watching from their windows, they're the ones who felt the weight of that siren." The two officers exchanged a look, then nodded awkwardly. "We are sorry for the disturbance," Daniels said, his voice quiet. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." As they turned to leave, Marcus watched them walk back to their cruiser. Reed glanced over his shoulder once, his face pale under the flashing lights. He'd learned something that night, maybe not fully, but enough to make him think. When the car drove away, a deep silence hung in the air before Tanya finally exhaled. "That was," she began, but Marcus interrupted gently, "expected." His tone was heavy, not angry, just tired. "It shouldn't be, but it is." Guests began to murmur, slowly relaxing again. A few came up to Marcus, offering quiet words of support. Malik tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, why were the police here? Did we do something wrong?" Marcus knelt down, looking his son in the eyes. "No, son," he said softly, "we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people just don't understand, but you never let that stop your joy, you hear me? Never." Malik nodded slowly, his eyes searching his father's face. "Okay," he whispered. As the lights disappeared down the street, the Johnsons stood together in the quiet glow of the porch light. The party slowly resumed, but the tone had changed. Laughter returned, but it carried a new kind of strength, one born from resilience, from pride, from refusing to let fear steal their joy. Meanwhile, across the street, Mrs. Peterson watched from her window, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. When she saw Marcus step out in uniform, her heart had skipped a beat. Shame washed over her, sharp and undeniable. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that her fear had never been about noise. It had been about something deeper, something she didn't want to name. She set her cup down and turned off the light, her reflection fading from the window. That night, Maplewood Drive learned something about perception, about prejudice, and about what it means when a uniform forces the world to see a man's worth rather than his skin. The next morning, the neighborhood felt unusually quiet. The confetti that had been scattered across the Johnsons' backyard glistened faintly in the early light, reminders of both joy and tension. The balloons drooped, the grill was cold, and the half-eaten cake sat covered in the kitchen, its bright frosting dulled overnight. Tanya stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, staring at the police tire marks faintly visible on the curb. The sirens were gone, the music had faded, but the feeling lingered, heavy and unshakable. Marcus sat at the table, still in his robe, scrolling through his phone. Overnight, several guests had posted about what happened. Photos of Malik's smiling face, surrounded by friends, stood alongside uneasy captions. They called the cops on a kid's birthday party. The comments were already pouring in, some expressing outrage, others disbelief. Marcus, Tanya said quietly, I didn't sleep a minute last night. Her voice trembled between exhaustion and frustration. We worked so hard to make this place feel like home, and one phone call, made us feel like strangers again. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, it's not the first time and it probably won't be the last. He looked up, meeting her eyes. But I'm not going to let it define us, or him. His gaze shifted toward the hallway, where Malik's laughter echoed faintly as he played with his new toys. Tanya forced a small smile. He's too young to understand what happened. Yeah, Marcus murmured, but one day he will, and when that day comes, I want him to remember that we stood tall. Later that morning, Marcus decided to mow the lawn. It wasn't about the grass, it was about routine, about reclaiming normalcy. But as he pushed the mower across the yard, he noticed curtains shifting in nearby windows. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others offered awkward waves. The unspoken tension hung in the crisp autumn air like smoke that refused to clear. Then, just as he was finishing, he heard a hesitant voice from behind. Mr. Johnson. Marcus turned. It was Mrs. Peterson, standing at the edge of her driveway, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red, as if she hadn't slept either. Morning, Marcus said, his tone neutral. She swallowed hard. I wanted to apologize. Her voice quivered. I was the one who called last night. I didn't mean for it to turn into all that. I thought something might be wrong. I wasn't thinking clearly. Marcus stood still for a moment, the hum of the mower fading into silence. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the layers of fear, guilt, and shame twisting together behind her expression. Mrs. Peterson, he said finally, his tone calm but firm, you didn't think something was wrong. You thought we were wrong. That's the difference. She flinched slightly, nodding, tears welling up. You're right, and I'm so sorry. When I saw you walk out in that uniform, her voice cracked. I realized what I'd done. Marcus's eyes softened, though his heart was still heavy. I appreciate you saying that, but you have to understand, it's not just about last night. This happens all the time. Families like mine get judged before we even speak. She nodded again, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, I just never thought I was one of those people, but maybe I was. Marcus didn't respond right away. The wind rustled the trees, scattering a few leaves across the lawn. The thing is, he said finally, you don't have to be hateful to cause harm, you just have to assume, and that's what hurts the most. Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'll do better, I promise. Marcus gave a small nod. That's all anyone can do, better than yesterday. She turned to leave, but before she did, she hesitated. Your son's birthday, was it nice, before all that? Marcus smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth breaking through. Yeah, he said, it was perfect, up until the sirens. That evening, Tanya invited a few close friends back over, not for another party, but to talk, to decompress. The Johnsons' living room filled with the quiet hum of conversation and understanding. Their friend Naomi, a teacher, leaned forward on the couch. You know, Marcus, she said, you walking out in that uniform probably saved the night from getting worse. Marcus nodded. Maybe, but it shouldn't take a badge for people to see my humanity. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Naomi sighed. It's the world we live in, but people notice these moments. The story's already spreading online. Maybe it'll make someone think twice next time. Marcus leaned back, thoughtful. I hope so, but real change doesn't come from going viral. It comes from conversations, from moments like this. Later, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Tanya found Marcus sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You handled that better than most people could," she said softly. He chuckled dryly. "Years on the force taught me to stay calm when I shouldn't have to." They sat in silence for a while, the night breeze cool against their skin. Then Tanya spoke again. "Do you think she meant it, Mrs. Peterson?" "I think she did," Marcus said. "Fear and ignorance can twist people, but guilt, real guilt, can wake them up." He paused. "The question is whether she'll stay awake." Inside, Malik was already asleep, clutching his new toy helicopter. On his nightstand sat a birthday card signed by his friends, a reminder that joy still existed, even when the world tried to dim it. The next morning, a surprise awaited the Johnsons. Someone, Mrs. Peterson, as it turned out, had left a small bouquet on their porch. No note, just a single white lily and a folded card that read, "Thank you for your grace." Tanya smiled when she saw it. Marcus didn't say anything, but he nodded quietly before heading off to work. When he put on his uniform that day, it felt heavier, not because of the badge, but because of what it meant. He wasn't just representing the department anymore. He was representing every man and woman who had ever been seen as a threat before being seen as human. At roll call, a few of his colleagues mentioned they'd heard about the incident. One of them, a young officer named Lopez, said softly, "If that were my kid, I'd be furious." Marcus looked at him, steady. "I was," he said, "but anger's easy, change takes more." And in that moment, Lopez nodded, understanding a truth that couldn't be taught in any academy. Back home, Malik came home from school with a drawing he'd made in art class, a house, a birthday cake, and a man in a police uniform standing beside a smiling family. At the top, he had written, "My dad keeps us safe." Tanya held the picture for a long time before hanging it on the fridge. The world outside wasn't perfect, not even close. But inside the Johnson home, love had once again proven stronger than fear. By the following week, what had begun as a neighborhood misunderstanding had spread far beyond Maplewood Drive. It started small, a post shared by one of Malik's cousins who had filmed the moment police arrived at the birthday party. The video wasn't dramatic. No one was shouting or resisting. It showed a uniformed Marcus stepping calmly out of his house, badge in hand, while two stunned officers froze in place. The caption read, "They called the cops on a black family's birthday party, then they realized the dad is the cop." Within hours, the clip caught fire. Retweets, shares, and reposts spread across platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Comments poured in. The irony. He handled that with so much grace. Imagine needing a uniform for people to see your worth. The story struck a nerve, igniting conversations about prejudice, assumptions, and the quiet ways racism still showed up in everyday life. By the second day, local news stations picked it up. Then national outlets followed. Cameras began appearing on Maplewood Drive, first one, then several. Reporters stood under the same oak tree where the birthday decorations had once fluttered, narrating live updates about the Johnson family incident. Headlines flashed across morning shows. Police called on black family's party, caller shocked when father was also a cop. From accusation to awareness, a birthday turns into a lesson on bias. Marcus hadn't wanted attention. He'd spent most of his career staying out of the spotlight, doing his job quietly, letting his work speak for itself. But suddenly, his life had become public property. People wanted interviews, quotes, statements. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, colleagues expressing support, strangers thanking him, others sharing their own stories of being misunderstood or judged. One afternoon, while sitting in the living room, Tanya looked up from her phone and said, "CNN wants to do a live segment. They said they'll keep it respectful." Marcus sighed deeply. "Respectful isn't the point," he murmured. "They want a soundbite. They want the shock factor. I'm not interested in being a headline." "But maybe," Tanya said carefully, "it's not about the headline. Maybe it's about what you say after it." Marcus thought about that. He wasn't someone who liked cameras. But he also knew silence could be dangerous. When you didn't tell your story, someone else would tell it for you and twist it. So reluctantly, he agreed to one interview. It was with a local anchor who had a reputation for empathy and integrity. The segment was filmed in their living room. Marcus sat in his uniform, Tanya beside him, Malik playing quietly in the corner. "Detective Johnson," the interviewer began softly, "when you walked out that night and revealed who you were, what went through your mind?" Marcus took a deep breath before answering. "Honestly, I wasn't thinking about my badge. I was thinking about my son, about how quickly joy can turn into fear for families that look like mine. I wanted him to see that we face ignorance not with anger, but with dignity." The interviewer nodded. "And to the neighbor who called 911, what would you say to her now?" Marcus hesitated for a long moment. "I'd say thank you," he finally said. "Not because what she did was right, it was, but because it started a conversation this country still needs to have. We can't heal what we won't face." The segment aired that evening. It wasn't flashy or sensational. It was quiet, thoughtful, and it went viral all over again. People from around the world shared clips of Marcus's words. Teachers played it in classrooms. Community leaders quoted it in town meetings. Churches, schools, and police departments used it to spark dialogue. For days, the Johnsons' mailbox overflowed with letters, handwritten notes from strangers expressing solidarity, gratitude, or guilt. One from Seattle read, "I'm a white mom who once called the police on a group of kids playing basketball too loudly. After watching your story, I realized how wrong I was. Thank you for showing grace where I showed fear." Another came from a retired officer in Chicago. "You reminded me why I joined the force, to protect, not to judge. Respect, brother." And perhaps the most touching of all came from Mrs. Peterson herself. She had already apologized in person, but her letter went deeper. "Detective Johnson, I can't erase what I did, but I can learn from it. I spent the last week reading about bias, about how our fears can be shaped by the things we refuse to see in ourselves. I hope one day Malik will grow up knowing that his family helped open someone's eyes. Thank you for not meeting my ignorance with hatred. I am determined to do better, not in words, but in action." Tanya folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer next to Malik's birthday drawings. "That's growth," she said softly. "That's how change begins." Meanwhile, Marcus found himself invited to speak at local events. Churches, schools, and even the police department wanted him to share his story, not as a victim, but as a voice for understanding. He accepted a few invitations, choosing his words carefully. He didn't speak with anger, he spoke with honesty. "I wear this badge with pride," he told a packed auditorium one evening, "but that badge shouldn't be the only thing that earns me respect. When I took this job, I swore to serve and protect everyone. But I can't do that if the people I serve are afraid of me or if I'm afraid of them. We have to see each other beyond the labels, beyond the uniforms, beyond the color of our skin." The room erupted in applause, but Marcus didn't smile. He wasn't doing this for applause. He was doing it because he wanted his son to inherit a better world, one where a birthday party didn't need to turn into a headline to teach people empathy. In the days that followed, life began to settle again. The cameras disappeared, the neighbors went back to trimming their lawns and collecting mail. But something had changed on Maplewood Drive. The hellos were warmer now, the silences less strained. Even Mrs. Peterson began waving from her porch when Tanya walked by with Ava. One evening, Marcus came home to find Malik sitting on the porch, holding his tablet. "Dad, look," he said, excitedly pointing to a video. "You're on YouTube, you're famous." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's hope not too famous, buddy." "No, it's good," Malik said earnestly, "everyone saying you're a hero." Marcus looked at his son for a moment, his expression softening. "You know what makes someone a hero, Malik?" he asked. "What?" "Doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Malik nodded seriously, his small face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "Then you're a hero, Dad." Marcus smiled faintly and wrapped an arm around his son. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but you're the reason I try to be." The world outside kept spinning, fast, chaotic, divided, but inside that home, a small ripple of change had begun. And sometimes that's all it takes, one moment of clarity, one act of grace, to remind people of their shared humanity. A few weeks after the incident, something remarkable began to happen on Maplewood Drive. The same neighborhood that once hid behind drawn curtains and quiet suspicion began slowly to open its doors. What had started as whispers of discomfort turned into conversations, real, unfiltered, necessary conversations. For the first time, neighbors who had barely exchanged greetings were now talking openly about what had happened, about race, bias, and belonging. It began with a small idea. Tanya was walking Ava to school one morning when she saw a flyer posted near the community board, "Neighborhood meeting, building a better Maplewood this Saturday at 5 p.m." The note was signed by several residents, including Mrs. Peterson. Tanya stopped and read it twice, unsure whether to feel surprised or skeptical. But when she got home, she showed it to Marcus. He studied it for a moment and then said quietly, "Looks like people want to do better." "Do you think it's genuine?" Tanya asked. Marcus nodded. "Maybe, and if it is, we should be there." Saturday came. The meeting was held in the small community park down the street, the same one where Malik used to ride his bike. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle beneath the oak trees. For the first time, it wasn't just a handful of neighbors who showed up. Nearly the entire block was there, families with children, retirees, couples, even the teenagers who usually kept to themselves. There was an air of nervous anticipation, like everyone knew they were standing on the edge of something uncomfortable but important. Mrs. Peterson stood near the front, clutching a stack of index cards. When she saw Marcus and Tanya arrive with their children, she smiled awkwardly and waved. Marcus nodded back. As the gathering began, the HOA president, a middle-aged man named Tom Simmons, stepped up. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know the past few weeks have been eye-opening. What happened at the Johnsons' house shouldn't have happened, and I think it's time we, as a community, have an honest talk about why it did." He gestured to Mrs. Peterson. She stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke into the microphone. "When I called 911 that night," she began, her voice cracking, "I thought I was being cautious, but really I was being ignorant. I made assumptions about people I didn't know, people who have been nothing but kind and respectful. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why I did it, and I realized something ugly about myself. I wasn't scared of noise. I was scared of difference." A hush fell over the crowd. Some nodded, others stared at the ground. Tanya felt her eyes sting with tears. Mrs. Peterson continued, "I can't undo what I did, but I can take responsibility for it. And I want to thank Marcus and Tanya, not just for forgiving me, but for showing this neighborhood what grace looks like." She paused, taking a deep breath. "If anyone else here has ever made assumptions like I did, it's time to say it out loud. That's the only way we change." At first, no one spoke. The silence stretched long and heavy. Then, one by one, people began to raise their hands. "I remember when the Johnsons first moved in," said a man from across the street. "I told my wife I hoped they wouldn't bring too many people over. I didn't even realize how wrong that sounded until now." Another woman spoke up. "I never said anything, but I noticed the way people looked at you during the first block party. I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry." Each confession was like a piece of the wall crumbling down, the wall that had quietly separated the Johnsons from everyone else. Marcus listened quietly, his expression steady, his hands folded in his lap. When it was finally his turn to speak, he stood and looked around the circle. "Thank you," he began, "not for the apologies, though they mean a lot, but for showing up. That's where it starts. We can't fix what we won't face." He paused, scanning the faces around him. That night wasn't just about one phone call. It was about a system of fear that's been taught, learned, and passed down. We all have to unlearn it together. He took a breath, then added, "I've worn this badge for 15 years, and every day I tell myself that I can't protect people if I don't first see them as human. The same goes for neighbors, for friends, for all of us here. If we start seeing each other as people, not stereotypes, not headlines, we change the world one street at a time." The crowd erupted in quiet applause, not the loud, performative kind, but a heartfelt one. Mrs. Peterson wiped her eyes. Tanya squeezed Marcus's hand. After the meeting, people lingered. Conversations that had once been awkward now flowed naturally. Neighbors exchanged phone numbers, shared gardening tips, and even made plans for a block-wide cookout, the first of its kind. A few days later, the cookout happened. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and grilled meat. Folding tables were lined up down the street, each one covered with homemade dishes, casseroles, ribs, cornbread, potato salad, peach pie. Laughter echoed between the houses, and for once no one looked through their curtains in suspicion. Mrs. Peterson brought her famous lemonade, insisting Malik have the first glass. "Extra sweet," she told him with a wink. Malik grinned, sipping happily. Tanya smiled softly at the sight. As the sun dipped low, Marcus stood beside Tom Simmons, watching the kids chase each other across the lawns. "This," Tom said quietly, "is what it should have been all along." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, sometimes it takes a storm to make people appreciate the calm." Across the street, someone turned on music, soft jazz that blended perfectly with the evening breeze. Marcus and Tanya exchanged a glance, then laughed as Ava tugged at their hands. "Come on, dance," she giggled. And so, under the golden light of the setting sun, the Johnson family danced, not out of defiance, but out of joy, out of healing. The same joy that had been interrupted weeks before now flowed freely again, stronger than ever. Neighbors joined in, clapping, laughing, swaying to the rhythm. For the first time since moving to Maplewood Drive, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Acceptance wasn't something he had to earn anymore, it was being offered freely. Later that night, as the stars blinked above, Mrs. Peterson approached Marcus one last time. "Detective," she said softly, "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I hope my actions can start earning it." Marcus smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't earned," he said. "It's lived, and you're living it." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. The night ended not with sirens or fear, but with music, laughter, and unity. The sounds of a neighborhood learning, changing, becoming something better than it was before. And for the Johnson family, it was proof that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures or speeches. Sometimes it begins with a simple act, showing up, listening, and daring to believe that people can grow. Months passed after that unforgettable evening when the Maplewood community came together under the soft glow of string lights and forgiveness. The Johnsons' home, once the silent center of tension, had now become a beacon of hope, a symbol of what it meant to rebuild trust, one conversation at a time. The story of what happened that night had spread beyond the neighborhood. Local news outlets covered it, not as another case of bias or division, but as an example of reconciliation. People from nearby towns began visiting Maplewood to attend the community events Marcus helped organize. Everywhere Marcus went, people recognized him, not as the black man the police were called on, but as Detective Marcus Johnson, the man who turned a moment of prejudice into a movement for change. Yet despite the recognition, he stayed grounded. He still woke up early, brewed coffee for Tanya, kissed his kids goodbye, and went to work like always. His uniform, once a symbol that divided perceptions, now carried new weight. It reminded everyone, including Marcus himself, that real authority isn't about control, it's about compassion. Tanya noticed the change too. The anxiety that used to shadow her when she walked down the street was gone. Now, when she waved to neighbors, they waved back genuinely. Mrs. Peterson had become an unexpected friend. The two often met for tea, sometimes talking about flowers and recipes, other times diving into deeper discussions about race, empathy, and what it means to truly see each other. One afternoon, while they sat on the porch, Mrs. Peterson looked out at the street where children were playing, black, white, Latino, all laughing together. "You know," she said softly, "I used to look out here and see differences. Now all I see are kids." Tanya smiled, her heart swelling. That's how it should be. Meanwhile, Malik had grown into a more confident version of himself. His teacher had asked him to write an essay about a hero. Most kids chose superheroes or famous figures. Malik, without hesitation, wrote about his father. He read it aloud during the school assembly. "My hero is my dad, Detective Marcus Johnson. People thought they knew him because of what he looked like, but they didn't know the truth, that he's brave, kind, and helps people even when they don't deserve it. My dad showed our neighborhood what real courage looks like, forgiving instead of fighting. The room had gone silent when Malik finished reading. Then, a standing ovation filled the auditorium. Marcus sat in the crowd, his eyes glistening. That was the moment he realized this wasn't just a story of what had happened to his family. It was a story that was changing lives far beyond their block. In the months that followed, Marcus began partnering with the local police department to host Community Connection Days, where officers and residents came together for dialogue, games, and barbecues. No badges, no barriers, just people. It wasn't easy at first. Old wounds don't heal overnight. But as more officers sat down and listened, truly listened, something started to shift. Trust began to grow again, fragile but real. Tanya joined a local diversity board, helping to create programs that supported inclusivity in schools. She shared her story at town halls and youth events, reminding people that fear thrives in silence, but empathy thrives in conversation. When you know your neighbor's story, she often said, it's harder to fear them. Mrs. Peterson also took her own steps toward making things right. She began volunteering at a cultural awareness group, even helping organize a scholarship fund in Malik's name for students of color interested in public service. When she first told Tanya and Marcus about it, she was nervous they might refuse. Instead, Tanya hugged her, tears streaming down her face. The local news soon picked up the story again, this time under a new headline. Maplewood transforms after bias incident, from division to dialogue. Reporters asked Marcus for interviews, but he rarely accepted. When he did, his message was always simple: don't wait for something bad to happen to start seeing people for who they are. Do the work now. One evening, Marcus sat with Tanya on the back porch, sipping lemonade as the cicadas hummed in the trees. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the kind of evening that felt like closure. Funny, Tanya said softly, how something that started so ugly could turn into something so beautiful. Marcus nodded, staring out at the fading light. That's life, isn't it? You can't control what comes at you, only how you respond. He paused, then added, I used to think strength meant standing tall in the face of hate. But now I know real strength is being willing to forgive, even when it's hard. Tanya smiled. That's what makes you the man you are. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying laughter from the kids playing in the yard. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The fear, the anger, the humiliation from that night, it was all fading now, replaced by something stronger: purpose. Weeks later, the family attended a local awards ceremony where Marcus was being honored for community leadership. As he stepped on stage, he noticed familiar faces in the crowd: neighbors, officers, Mrs. Peterson, and even the 911 dispatcher who had handled the call that night. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus looked out at the audience and said, this isn't just my story, it's ours. Because real change doesn't happen in courtrooms or headlines. It happens on front porches, in conversations, and in the moments when we choose understanding over fear. Applause filled the room. Tanya smiled proudly from the front row. Malik and Ava waved from their seats, beaming. As they drove home later that night, the city lights glimmered against the windshield. Malik leaned forward from the back seat and asked, Dad, are you proud of our neighborhood now? Marcus glanced at Tanya, then at the kids in the rearview mirror. Yeah, he said softly, I'm proud of all of us. Outside, Maplewood slept peacefully, no sirens, no shouting, just quiet harmony. The same street that had once echoed with suspicion now glowed with unity. For Marcus and his family, the lesson was clear. Sometimes it takes one painful moment to awaken a lifetime of change. And if handled with grace, even the darkest night can give birth to a brighter dawn. As the sun set over Maplewood Drive one last time in this story, the Johnson family sat together on their porch, the faint glow of string lights casting warm shadows over their faces. The yard, once the site of tension and fear, now felt alive with memory, reflection, and hope. Marcus leaned back in his chair, glancing at Tanya and their children, and a soft smile crossed his face. What had happened, the fear, the assumptions, the sirens had left a mark, but it also left lessons that would last a lifetime. Looking back, Marcus realized the significance of that night wasn't just about the neighbor who called 911. It wasn't about the flashing lights, the police officers, or even the viral videos. It was about the ripples that followed, the conversations, the community healing, and the courage it took for people to see beyond their biases. He thought about Mrs. Peterson, who had admitted her mistakes and worked to change them, and about the neighbors who had chosen reflection over defensiveness. Even Malik's innocent perspective reminded him that seeing each other as human first, before titles, uniforms, or appearances, was a lesson that could change hearts and minds. As the Johnsons sat together, Marcus spoke softly to Tanya. "You know, it wasn't the uniform that mattered last night. It was grace. It was how we responded when fear tried to take hold. That's the part I want people to remember." Tanya nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the porch lights. It's easy to get lost in anger or resentment, but when you respond with understanding, even in the face of ignorance, you change more than your own life. You change the lives around you. He looked at Malik, who was playing quietly with his toy helicopter. "Son," Marcus began, "remember this. There will be times when people judge you unfairly, when they fear you for things you can't control. But the way you respond matters more than their fear. Respond with dignity, respond with kindness, respond with truth." Malik looked up, his small face serious. "I will, Dad." Marcus smiled. "Good, that's all I ask." Then, turning to the audience, because this story wasn't just for the Johnsons or their neighborhood, Marcus would say this if he could speak directly. To everyone watching, remember that fear and prejudice often hide in the most ordinary places. Sometimes it's in a call to 911, sometimes in the assumptions you make about someone walking down the street. But change doesn't start when someone else notices, it starts with you. Challenge your assumptions, listen before you judge, see the humanity in every person because every person deserves to be seen. He paused, letting the words settle as if each viewer could feel the weight of them. And to the parents, the children, the neighbors, and the friends, teach these lessons early. Show your children that respect isn't earned by appearances. Show them that grace is stronger than fear. Show them that joy, like a birthday party, should never be interrupted by ignorance. Tanya added softly, "And to those who have made mistakes, who have judged unfairly or feared unfairly, it's never too late to change. Apologize, learn, grow. Every act of reflection is a step toward a stronger, more compassionate community." Marcus looked around the porch one last time. The quiet streets, the sleeping houses, the distant hum of a city that had not yet learned this lesson, it all reminded him that the work never ends. But in moments like this, it was clear that small steps could create ripples that reached far beyond a single night, a single street, a single family. As the camera of this story pans away, the last images remain: Marcus, Tanya, Malik, and Ava sitting together under the warm glow of the porch light, the Johnson family united and unshaken. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson's home is quiet, but her heart has changed. The neighborhood, once wary and divided, hums with possibility. And for the audience, the message is unmistakable. Your actions matter, your words matter, your willingness to see people as human, to listen, to forgive, and to respond with dignity, that is where change begins. If you take nothing else from this story, let it be this: you have the power to turn fear into understanding, division into unity, and a single moment of ignorance into a lifetime of growth. So here's your challenge, Swift Tale viewers. Reflect on your own assumptions, talk to someone who seems different from you, and take one small step today to make your community stronger. Share this story, start a conversation, and let empathy lead the way. And of course, if this story resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Swift Tale. Comment below with your thoughts, your experiences, your reflections, your moments of growth. Let's continue this conversation together, because every voice matters and every story has the power to change the world. The Johnsons sit in quiet unity, the porch light glowing softly, a symbol of resilience, grace, and hope. And the night, once full of tension, is now full of possibility. The end.